Welcome to the first episode of the Cybersecurity Boardroom, the podcast that breaks down the complex world of cybersecurity for non-IT executives. I'm your host, Vincent Shoto, and I'm joined by my co-host, T. Sol. Hey, T.
Hey, what's going on, Vince?
Nothing much. So together, we're here to make cybersecurity more accessible and understandable, helping you protect your business from the growing array of digital threats. With years of cybersecurity in the industry, T and I will guide you through the maze of cybersecurity concepts and trends and best practices. We'll share real-world examples, insights, practical tips that you can apply to your organization, even if you don't have an extensive IT background. In each episode, we'll tackle pressing topics, and occasionally we'll bring in an expert or two to offer their unique perspectives. Whether you're looking to enhance your cybersecurity strategy or you simply want to stay informed about the latest trends, this podcast is something for everyone. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and let's dive into the world of cybersecurity together. Thanks for tuning in to the Cybersecurity Boardroom, and let's get started. So T, why don't you tell us about yourself?
Yeah, so T. Sol here. I got kind of a varied background. I was actually in the Air Force, taught survival, evasion, resistance, and escape for a bit. And then got out, made a few pivots before ended up where I'm at now, but really passionate about cybersecurity for one. I think it's a very pressing issue these days, especially with a lot of our infrastructure coming or being vulnerable and just vulnerable to attacks. So I think we need to fix that. But yeah, just really passionate about cybersecurity and veterans in the technology field. And I'm super pumped about this podcast.
Cool, man. So I think you bring like a very unique perspective. So a lot of times, I've interacted with a lot of folks, whether in business or in IT. They've got either some technical acumen that allows them to address cybersecurity concerns, or they've got a strong view and opinion from a business perspective. But their motivating factor isn't always clear to me. And I think with you, what I like is that I really get a sense that you're passionate about it. You protected your country. When you were in the military, you were able to physically do something about it. Now that you're in the workforce and back home, you've still got that passion in you, and you've really figured out a way to be impactful by identifying a threat that exists, to our nation, and being able to impact it. So I'm really jazzed about having you on this podcast with me on this journey, man. And I really appreciate your perspective, and look to get as much as you can give us from your perspective as we go through each of these topics. So what we'll do is every session or every episode we'll have a general overview of some recent breaches. We'll talk about the topics that are recent, that are hitting us, and really try to better understand what companies could have done a little bit differently, where some of their exposure was. And then we'll go into our main topic for the podcast, which happens to be third-party risks in cybersecurity for today's. So firstly, T, let's talk about a couple of the recent breaches. So what's out there? What's been happening as of late? What are things that you've been seeing?
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff happening right now in the world of breaches, and in fact, this last quarter has seen quite an uptick in breaches overall in the U.S. We're actually on pace this quarter to beat last year. So the pace of those breaches is picking up. Most recently, AT&T just had, and actually this is the largest breach in U.S. history. It's huge. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, I lived through it.
Yeah, I'm sure that you got the notification along with a lot of us other AT&T folks. But yeah, 7.6 million current account holders with AT&T. Their information was breached. You're talking social security numbers, passcodes, their full name, email addresses, actual physical addresses, their phone numbers, their AT&T account numbers. I don't believe that AT&T has released the details about why the breach happened, but I would say that's the biggest one here. That's
Yeah,
gonna happen.
that's one I think that is unique in that it was something that was felt by the general public, all the consumers of the mobility products that were impacted. I mean, just when it went down for the first time in a long time, I felt really vulnerable because I happen to have my Wi-Fi go down at the same time, and I'm there. Well, who do I contact? What do I do? I can't call anyone. I can't. I was dead in the water while things were out, and so it's actually a pretty scary feeling when that's happening. And what's interesting though is that there's the bad part is that the bad actors were able to get access to a lot of sensitive information,
Mhm.
which in and of itself worries the heck out of me because it just poses such a huge risk going forward with people having your information, my personal information, your personal information is out there, which is scary. But
Mhm.
what's interesting though, in that when this thing happened, obviously, to bring down a company like AT&T, this had to be well planned, well executed. And a lot of times, what these bad actors do is they'll just get into your environment and they'll sniff and they'll just stay around. You won't even know that they're there. And they'll
Mhm.
let time go by and then just, pounce on the opportunity to make damage. And sometimes what they'll do, they'll run little tests, they'll show themselves in one area to see if you catch them, or they'll take something down and then bring it back up to see if you caught it.
Mhm.
So a lot of times when we're monitoring this stuff, we think that we resolved something and we just wash it off as resolved or a non-issue. But we really have to remember that a lot of these incidents that take place are tests for a bigger attack. How you react when something goes down or something is impacted is gives them a lot of information that they need to be able to adjust their approach so that they can be really impactful. So I'm just hoping that this is just one situation that they've been able to mitigate, and that they've been able to remove them from their environment, and they put the measures in place and the continual monitoring and all that good stuff to make sure that they've isolated it. But God forbid this happens again at a larger scale. I mean, it'll be a big issue.
Mhm. Yeah. Another thing that I think is interesting, it's not necessarily a breach. It hasn't happened yet. Everybody should knock on wood here. But the power grids are, incredibly susceptible right now. I think, let's see, what is the name of it? The North American Electric Reliability Corporation, NERC. They actually said on a webcast Thursday um, that the number of susceptible points in the electrical networks, those are increasing by 60 per day. So you've got 60 vulnerabilities in the US electrical grid, 60 new ones every single day. So,
That's crazy.
and so when you talk about, being a veteran and protecting the country and then coming back to potentially a grid that could be shut down at a moment's notice, that's cause for concern for me.
Uh,
Um,
Cause for concern for all of us. I
all
think,
of us.
and so I love the concept that we've got that from a free enterprise perspective, and sometimes I just feel that it's a double-edged sword when it comes to anything having to do with the public sector. It really becomes a few to many type relationship, and then if you've got to take action to safeguard and put in policy and process and all that to govern all that stuff, it really is an uphill battle to be able to do it right, to be efficient and effective about it. But
Mhm.
the efficiency is key. So how do you do that quickly? How do you make sure you get everybody on board to do things in a manner that is consistent with best practices? And how do you monitor and manage that and continually ensure that all of our grids are stable? There's so many interactions, so many entry points from a consumer perspective, and so many different types of products and services, and so many companies that are out there. I'm really concerned about the challenge that brings, and how making sure that each one of these organizations has a solid cybersecurity posture in place to be able to mitigate, and all the policies and the processes that need to go around that as well. I think that's a huge risk and exposure for any organization, for
Mhm.
general public.
Yeah. What do you think makes it, I mean, so such a challenge? I mean, a lot of the ways that you can mitigate these risks, they revolve around policy, procedure, people. That seems to be a challenge for a lot of organizations right now.
Yeah. So listen, the reality is that people, the humans, we represent the largest risk from a cybersecurity perspective, from any security perspective, because we can't be controlled. There's human error. There's always opportunity to take advantage of a human that's interacting with something, and then you've got systems in place that they're interacting with that have that risk. Um, and to have strong risk management policy and processes in place requires for a business to make a decision to focus on risk management. Risk management is not an IT issue, right? It's not solely IT, it's a business function. And so they need to come to the conclusion that they need to have risk management in place, need to have policy and process, even to begin assessing where the risks are from a vulnerability perspective. They need to have tools in place to be able to safeguard the environment and to continually monitor. But you can have all the tools that you'd like if you don't have a robust policy, robust set of processes, and robust procedures or work instructions that are continually being assessed to make sure they're still fit for use and fit for purpose. You continually expose yourself, and so it's a journey. It's an ongoing journey.
Mm-hmm. And it sounds like what you're saying is, I mean, is really creating a culture within these organizations of risk awareness.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, it's got to start from the top down. So that really means changing the executive perspective to be more focused on risk, and not necessarily more focused on risk, but to account for these cyber risks, in their everyday modeling, if you will.
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Really. Yeah. So I think it really is from the top down initially, but I also think generationally, the younger population, those that are coming out of school now and that are hitting the workforce, are more sensitive to it. And so what I'm hoping is that we'll have that sensitivity that's already there from a first level or entry level perspective, that will already be in tune with that risk, and that organizational push to drive that culture. I think that's going to happen organically through time. We'll just be sensitized to it. What's important is that organizations continually push so that we're not numb to it, so that we don't think that, okay, just another breach, whatever, and move on to the next one. Everybody's going to forget about it. I think that's the risk, is that folks may become a little bit complacent and may see this, maybe numb to all the different risks that are out there, and then just throw up their hands and say, just we'll just deal with it when it comes, type thing. I think that's the biggest problem. That risk management and that corporate culture. It has to be a culture that is continual, that has a desire to succeed and recognizes the value that the risk policies and the risk function in the organization brings to the success of the organization, and it's across the board.
Absolutely agree there.
Do
So
we have any other breaches or anything?
yeah, so we haven't talked about it yet, but here's another big one. This is actually back on February 13th. It's Bank of America. And so they were actually breached via a third party. So this is through Infosys, McCamish, IMS. So yeah, so they actually, and so what's interesting about that is that the Infosys breach actually impacted a lot of folks besides Bank of America. Fidelity was another one, had a ton of records breached. And so, and I know we're going to get into this in a bit, but essentially what we're seeing is that these large players, they're not getting directly breached. What's happening is these threat actors are going after the weak links in their supply chain. Yeah. And you talked about earlier about those probing attacks. They're probing those weak links. They're responding, or they're not responding in appropriate ways. And it's allowing these threat actors to get in. So I think that's a nice segue into our next topic.
Yeah. So absolutely. So I guess we'll just get into our next topic then, to get into our main topic about the third-party risks in cyber. I mean, so in that case there, we're talking about the risk that third parties represent. I mean, there's a perfect example. We have a lot of um, theory, right? So cyber, a lot of times the breaches are very theoretical for folks, and
Mhm.
I always say that you don't know what fire actually feels like until you've been burned, and so there's a lot of theory out there as to what it feels like or what happens when breaches occur, and this is some of these opportunities are creating for it's now practical. You're now seeing it, you're now feeling it, and third parties represent, I think I read somewhere that they represent about 60% of the breaches. So I mean that's huge. It's huge vulnerability for
Yeah.
an organization. I mean, think of it. So my biggest concern with third party in an environment is that you can make a decision to focus on risk in your organization. You can make sure that you're looking at it from every perspective, whether it's HR, your sales organization, solutions, your product, manufacturing, whatever it is that you'd like. But that does not guarantee that the vendors or third party folks that you interact with are going to be as robust as you are, or as secure as you are. And so, I mean, that represents a lot. I mean, you can have data breaches, and they have supply chain attacks where they're going in and just looking at that vulnerability, and trying to maximize on the vulnerability that's in the supply
Yeah.
chain.
Yeah.
Um, you have an
And
issue because you've got lack of control. You can't control what they're doing or what they're saying.
it's not just the risk of data breach, there's operational risk as well.
Yeah,
So if you're an organization who's relying on a third party to provide whatever product or service that you do to your clients, and that vendor goes down, or they have a breach and they have a ransomware attack,
yeah.
what processes and policies do you have in place to ensure redundancy?
Yeah, that
Uh,
continuity, right? So continuity when it comes to vendors is also very important, making sure you have the ability to fail over to something else if something happens, or another approach with
mhm,
the same vendor. So building that continuity into your relationships with your vendors is key. A lot of times they have, the vendor will have an interface into your system or APIs. That's a huge vulnerability. There's API at rest that's there that if it's not robust, can compromise you. But at the same time, what happens is we'll deploy a lot of these interfaces and we don't really look at them. We assume that they're working a certain way. So we're not monitoring them. And so
mhm,
making sure that they're designed in a way that are robust is one thing, but then not monitoring them, is a huge risk. And then things change in business, situations arise. And so continually evaluating those interfaces, those APIs to make sure they're fit for use, fit for purpose, assessing them when you're changing the environment from a release perspective, all that good stuff. I mean,
mhm,
that's absolutely key. And I think another good way of trying to mitigate a lot of that is through access management. If you are going to provide a vendor with access to your environment, you need to limit what it is that they have access to. You can't give them access to things that they don't need to have access to, just because you need to be able to mitigate that risk. And
mhm,
because you don't know what their security practices are, and it can result in a lot of things like intellectual property theft. You can have a whole bunch of different scenarios can come up, and then
mhm,
you've got compliance violations. If one of your vendors has a compliance violation, does something that they're not supposed to, that exposes you, you inherit that risk. So all of a sudden you may be exposed to penalties or legal liabilities that are a result of that. So those vendors really need a tight integration into your organization, both from a technology perspective, but from a business perspective as well, from a policy, process, governance, all that good stuff.
mhm.
So there's
So
a lot of risk.
yeah, I mean, so when I think about an organization that recognizes that they have a gap, or they don't really have insight into the riskiness of their data trading partners, and they want to. I mean, how does someone who's just beginning that journey, where do they even start?
Yeah.
What do you
Right.
even?
Well,
Yeah.
I think the first thing is they have to make the decision that they are going to recognize that there needs to be a risk function in the organization. That risk and they need to understand that that risk function is not solely an IT function. IT is
Mhm.
a portion of the risk function that helps deliver some of the tools that you need to be able to, you know, to safeguard, but it's not IT. And a lot of times you speak with folks and they just pass it off as an IT type function. And so the first thing they have to do is they have to come to that conclusion and understand and decide that they are going to have a risk mitigation or risk management function in the organization that will look at risk soup to nuts in the org, right? Whether it be HR through hiring practices and the transactions that they've got, or how you're building your solutions, how you're interacting with vendors, how you're delivering your operations, you know,
Mhm.
all of that stuff is in the purview of risk management. And so once they've done that, they need to establish policy. Through policy, you can then start setting the guidelines to different functions that you've got in your organization to establish the proper processes. And the processes will then drive interactions. The work instructions, the procedures that underpin all those processes can then be governed. And so you start off by accepting that you want to do that. You establish that policy, start deploying the processes, and then make sure that your procedures ensure that compliance and ensure that you're aligned from a risk perspective. And then
Mhm.
once you've deployed, that you need to make sure that you have some type of lean or continual improvement or continual innovation type framework in place so that the people that are operating within the environment have an opportunity to identify risk and help drive it up the chain in the organization so that it can be reviewed from a business security impact perspective so that you can then drive other important changes to understand what's happening. So it's really you talked about a culture earlier. It's really about that is a cultural flow in an organization, and it really starts with that policy at the beginning.
Yeah. And I think there's also a number of tools, from a tech stack perspective that can allow you to gain insight into, first of all, who are your data partners? A lot of folks don't know. I mean, we're talking to an organization who didn't know that they were looped into the Change Health breach, and they only found out, they found out weeks later because an employee let them know that they were unable to process certain transactions.
Yeah.
And so I know that there's tools out there that will allow you to get sort of like a real-time inventory build of exactly who your trading partners are, and then to take it a step further and elucidate on what their vulnerabilities are from a public facing perspective. So I think having a tool like that is certainly going to allow you to cover your bases, especially when you've got policy and procedure in place.
Yeah, I agree. I keep trying to, my focus in this podcast anyway is really to help non-IT leaders and organizations really get a sense for what's going on and some of the risks that they've got and get an idea for things that they can do to mitigate. So tools absolutely important.
Mhm.
Absolutely an IT function, to focus on the tools that are brought to the table. But I think, one of the first rules within ITSM is that you don't have the tools drive the business. The business needs to drive the tools. So we need to recognize this as as a business function that
Mhm.
leverages tools. And so the tools, as you say, are a huge part of the solution, a huge important factor. I guess I'd like to focus on a little bit. So how do they mitigate? What do we do to mitigate the risk? So we've talked about the risk that they bring, but what do we do to mitigate that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I think it all comes down to collaborating with those trading partners.
Mm,
There's a number of different ways you can do that, but I think that first involves, getting an idea of what their security posture looks like. You can do that through, I mean, there's different audit tools out there. You can, there are questionnaires. You simply have a conversation with these folks about,
right,
what their current posture looks like. I
right.
think that's step one. Um, from there, it's a matter of, just like you said, is actually putting those safeguarding policies and procedures in place.
Mhm.
I think is what. What's
I,
your?
I think that I agree with you, by the way. So you need to conduct that assessment. I think that assessment needs to come in the form of due diligence initially when you start dealing with someone. So sometimes we have such a desire to generate revenue or to to drive certain business activity that we're quick to go through the due diligence portion of a vendor as it pertains to security. So before you engage with them, really understanding what their security practices are, what they've got in place, how they deal with other organizations, right, and how they actually deal with security within their environment. And then whatever you do, when you do bring them in, I think you have to have some contractual agreements in place. And these need to outline the security expectations and the responsibilities. So your contracts with any vendor or sub need to have some reference to security and cyber so that we can set those expectations. We need to know who's going to do what within the scope of our engagement.
Mhm.
Then we need to make sure that we understand specifically what they need access to and make sure that from a business perspective, it flows, and then pass that on to the IT organization so that they can drive that access management to limit that vendor access to what they need.
Mhm.
Um, and then I think you need to really do a lot of monitoring and auditing. So you need to monitor their activities. So, like I said earlier, we set up like these EDIs or there's APIs in place, and where we interact with them, and we sort of get complacent. Something works, business is flowing, revenue's coming in, and I think if we don't monitor and and audit the type of activity that's going on, then we expose ourselves, and we need to focus on that vendor risk management.
Mhm.
We need to really develop a robust program internally that continually assesses. My biggest concern when it comes to those types of assessments too is that there's sort of a date stamp, right? So if you start with someone and they'll tell you that they're compliant and they demonstrate it to you, they show you everything they've got in place, you audit it, all that good stuff, and you've got a breach that comes up, but the last time you checked with them was a year ago or 2 months ago or last week. That's all good, but those are stamped in time, and they do not represent what the actual posture was of your vendor and what was happening in their environment, and to underpin what your posture is when you need to be able to clearly demonstrate to regulating authorities to avoid fines, or banks if you had cash that's been compromised. I mean, you need to be able to demonstrate what not only what your position was, but also what your vendor's position was. So I think we need to focus on practices and tools that are really looking at things to be able to demonstrate in a continual fashion what someone's posture was and what it was in their environment. And then lastly, I think that we deploy security incident management processes in our organization, but we assume that our vendors also have incident management processes in place. And so I think it's important to understand what they've got in place, and it's important to have a bridge process that underpins one another. Should they identify a risk from a security point of view, they need to have a process in place, a set of procedures that are able to advise you and inform you, and then you need to be able to continually interact with them throughout a breach. So you need to be bringing them on to calls and talk through breaches, and you need to be, from an executive perspective, you guys need to be in the know. The communication is going to be key, because when that outage is taking place, I mean, that is a very critical time, because that's where a lot of things just fail and fall apart. And so having robust communication underpinned by policy, process, procedures from an incident management perspective, I think is very, very key.
Yeah. And I think, you mentioned a few times about sort of monitoring the environment, or not monitoring the environment, but being aware of what their security posture was, a week ago, et cetera. And I think it also comes down to, enforcing your organization's security posture or security policies on those vendors.
Right.
And so one of the ways to do that is contractually, and the other way is through different tools that are available out there to allow you to to basically get that real-time enforcement.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I mean, I think, you know, third-party risk, it's certainly not going to go away. You know, humans take the path of least resistance, to draw from my, survival background there. But and so they're always going to go after those weak links. And so, you know, organizations, that are sort of the primary there,
Yeah.
they need to be aware of who those trading partners are, how risky they are, prioritize them in terms of riskiness, and then work with them to enforce those organizational policies.
Yep. Agree. 100%. So I guess, yeah, we pretty much covered it. So I really thank you, T. I'd like to maybe just if we can just recap just the heavy hitters on the third party risks. First is risk management is owned by the business and not IT, because it needs to govern and manage risk across all areas of the business, right?
Mhm.
To set proper expectations with vendors, and you need to allow them access to only what they need, right? Third,
Mhm.
you need to continually assess your third-party ventures, the vendor's security posture, and you have to monitor their activity. So we can't be complacent. And then lastly, you need to make sure that you've got, that you've integrated your security incident management processes to safeguard your environment and to efficiently, effectively take action on in the event of any breach. So, having said that, I really, really thank you, T, for our first podcast. Looking forward to many more. I'd like to thank you, our viewers today, and we'd like to invite you to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, and you can engage with us on LinkedIn and on Instagram as well. And you can join us on our next episode, where we'll be talking about the difference between major cyber attacks and your conventional major outages in IT, and how, as an executive, you can plan to mitigate the impact on your business. I'd like to thank a special thank to our sponsors, Cloud Warriors, for their continued support, and invite you to visit them at cloudwarriors.ai. And till we meet again. So I look forward to our next discussion. We'll talk next time.
Till next time.
All right. See you.
Bye.